Hey, how's everybody doing? So, when it comes to speculative fiction and the elements that go into that, I think there are a lot of good examples out there of what makes good speculative fiction, or mainly focusing on for this discussion board, and from what I know, and sometimes my interests are the science fiction and then the fantasy side of speculative fiction. So when it comes to the fantasy side, we all think about um, magic or mystical elements, uh, some type of ancient traditions that take place, that are sometimes very similar to like the actual to actual ceremonies that go on in, say, in the real world, but just have little bits and pieces that are a bit different. As far as the science fiction the science fiction genre goes, most of us look at science fiction and we always, first off, we think about it has to be some type of interstellar travel, it has to be some type of colonization, or different species that are involved, and which that's not an issue, it's not a problem. But I mean, I think that we have to broaden that especially when it says in our discussion board, the first thing says consider more deeply the concepts of world building. So when I think about world building on my own time, I think about how would cultures change? Like, how would we be able to continue culturally? Let's say, would there be a way for the Native Americans to have, colonies out there where their people's traditions from Earth are still actually in practice, or maybe even expand? Or let's say, would languages change as time goes on? Um, would we would different nations splinter off into different sub factions, or would they stay, let's say, Russia being Russia or America being America? Would we go out into space and literally try to keep those banners flying high, not only at home but in the solar system? On the fantasy side, I look at it as, how would you create a meaningful a world to where people can feel like, hey, there's I know in the article that we read, the five foundations of world building, it says on the first two things, the rules that are in place. You can't really, I feel like you really can't have a fantasy world and then just have it thrown in there as, okay, well, these people use magic but no one else does. Well, why is it that only those people use magic? Like, there has to be some type of backstory in place that you as a writer know, and you have to figure out some way to weave that in there throughout your story, so that if people ever ask you, it doesn't seem like you're just making it up. Oh, well, I never really, well, the reason why is because blah 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 blah. But then that makes no sense. You know what I mean? Like, the reason why you give makes no sense, as far as, 6 novels down the line in a fantasy book, and you're still trying to say that nobody else has ever used a certain magic. But you have parts in the story that to a certain point, I've read many novels that are like this, where it's a contradiction of only these people can use whatever the technology or whatever the magic is, or whatever that may be. And then you find out later on, oh, well, by the way, these other people actually were using it, but now they don't. Well, no, you can't flip flop around and have that. There has to be set in stone, this, and this. Why? And I mean, this is something I guess we could all play around with and try to figure that out. I know my video is going a little bit over, but I'm going to try to touch on a couple of the other things. So another thing I think, when it comes to speculative fiction and how does it fit in my own writing and the stories that I've read. For right now, a lot of the times I'm writing a lot of speculative fiction, but I literally have 2 stories that are out there. I think I've mentioned that. I mentioned the fantasy in a previous discussion board post. I think it was last week or the week before that, one of those. But I have a science fiction novel that I'm working on as well. It's a military SF story where it actually has elements of I don't like to call it magic, but let's just say mystical, magical elements, or some spell casting in it. Only a small portion of it. It's only in one chapter, and it's only to explain how somebody died, and they were basically brought back to life. And if I explain it, it seems like a magical element, but it's really not. It's just a separate species that their whole thing is there to resurrect the dead, and that's the only way they can go from a corporeal form to a physical form is just by taking over the body of someone that has died. It's not in a sinister way. It's really just to kind of keep that person in the fight, and it only happens very selectively. And I mean, and it only explains the death of one character and how they came back, and then you don't find that you don't even find that person died for like 6 or 7 chapters. It's perfectly fine. I think it's easy to put those type of elements in fiction, and you can mix them up, fantasy and science fiction. But like I said, it has to be rules. I can't go into explanation of how that all plays out in that science fiction because I'm already at 6 minutes and something. But I would love to get some feedback on that, and then we can just go back and forth from there as the week continues.